ABC Radio Melbourne. You're with Richelle Hunt.
Have you later in life slowly developed, or maybe really quickly, developed a fear? Maybe it's something you've had since a child, or maybe it's something that's over time. So it started out as a bit of a quirk, a little bit of a, bit of a glitch, has turned into a full-blown fear. And I think this can happen for either children or as an adult. I know I used to love flying as a child, but now as an adult, I really don't like flying. Now, is that just because I know more about flying, I read the news more, and I understand how it works? Sometimes it doesn't work, and my brain can compute that and sort of work through the process of that. And why is it that I didn't have that fear as a child? My daughter, just recently, so we took her to this incredible theme park, like it was a Crocodile World place thing. In it, there was an incredible exhibit of snakes. Now, she doesn't have a fear of snakes. Or should I say didn't have a fear of snakes. Loved looking at all of the snakes, pointing them out. We were reading what they were. Heaps of other kids there. There was an exhibit of the really large kind of pythons, the ones whose girth are, the size of your waist. And they're quite frightening. And at first I was like, whoa. We spoke to her about them and we were there and she was fascinated by them. No problems. We moved on. We went, had lunch, went home. Day continued. Next day continued. But then we spoke about them just casually. And then that night, which is probably our fault, but then that night she went to bed and had a nightmare about two huge snakes. So very obvious as to where that fear has come from. But now it's continued. She doesn't want to go to sleep. She's scared she'll have a nightmare about snakes. She doesn't want to visit a certain place because she thinks, there might be snakes there. So, all of a sudden, you start to think, okay, there is a real fear starting here. How do I stop it in its tracks? What do I say? What is the right thing to do? What is the right thing to say? I'm not sure, what the right thing to do here is. Maybe this is something that has happened to you or to your child or happened to you as a kid as well. But as I said, it's not just children. I know a friend of a friend kind of always had a bit of a germaphobe situation. If you touch a handrail or a toilet door or whatever it may be, you've got to wash your hands. But slowly over time, that germaphobe issue has developed and has morphed into something bigger, to the point where they went away and she didn't want to not only sleep on any of the pillows that were in this accommodation bed, she didn't want to lean against any of the even display pillows that were there. And I discussed it and said, this is turning into a real thing. She's like, I know, I'm not sure where it's come from. So how do you develop a fear? Is it something that slowly morphs? Is it an experience? Is it a nightmare? And is it something that then necessarily remains lifelong? Can you shed it? Or does it stay with you? And as a parent, what on earth do you say? You've got to help me here. 1300 222 774. You can text 0437 774 774. Have you developed a fear over time? What have you done to overcome it? What has helped? And how do you think that it's turned into a fear? 1300 222 774.
You're with Richelle Hunt on ABC Radio Melbourne.
Shawn Goldberg is a psychologist and the director of Mind Up. Shawn, can we just slowly develop fears?
Hi, Richelle. Yes, absolutely. It doesn't usually come on immediately unless it's after a traumatic event or a traumatic nightmare, as it seems like your daughter had.
And so then what do you do about that? If someone all of a sudden has a nightmare and that is the trigger for what is, you can see, turning into a fear, what is the right thing to do and say?
As a parent, I think it's just to really be able to listen to what the child's fears are and to help them ground their experience into the difference between a nightmare experience versus their everyday. Their everyday is much safer. And putting some boundaries around that. So maybe even preparing your daughter for the nighttime sleep and say, maybe tonight you could have a nightmare, but these are the things that you can do. Really, with a nightmare, what's frightening, aside from the actual image of it, is also waking up from it and having that intense fear along with it, which only with the right skill sets takes a few moments to calm yourself down.
So when you say prepare them and know what you can do, what are those things that you can do?
Well, when she wakes up, first of all, you'll take her through some kind of script, if you like, where you can just say, okay, today you've had maybe a bad day or been thinking about the snakes again, so you might have a nightmare. And if you wake up, these are the things you can do. So when you wake up, you're just going to turn on the light and you're going to say 5 things that you can see, which is a grounding exercise that's commonly used. And then you'll remind yourself that you've just had a bad nightmare about snakes, but you'll look around the room and see that there's none in the room and that you're safe right now, and you can always go to mum and dad. And that seems to help the mind just realise that they are safe in that moment.
Why is it that sometimes nightmares can stay with us, like reoccurring nightmares, they can stay with us for a long time, even though the actual fear may not be something that is as prevalent as it once was?
Well, that's a great question. I think our unconscious really plays havoc with us at times with our dreams, and especially nightmares, and it can feel really close to home. And it might be a nightmare of our worst, possible events or fears that come true in our mind, and then that can resonate with us versus other nightmares that may not be resonate as deeply.
1300 222 774. Not just children. Obviously, nightmares and fears develop a lot as kids, but they also develop a lot as we get a little older. So maybe you have developed a fear as you've grown into an adult. 1300 222 774. Floyd, that's happened to you.
Yes, it has.
What happened?
Well, I developed a fear of heights and flying sometime after I turned 45. I have no idea why. I took my son to the Melbourne show, and went on a ride with him. That I used to enjoy that sort of thing, and then I found it just absolutely terrifying.
And this was later in life. So, Shawn, is that common?
Look, I've heard a lot of these fears come up later on in life, especially in accompanying children. So where parents are with children, the parent seems to then develop a certain fear. I see that a lot with heights and flying, absolutely.
And what's the link with children, do you think? Is it scared of something happening to them?
Yes, in a sense of mortality. I mean, it's not natural for us to be up high. Our brain is not thinking, oh, this is safe. Part of that experience is a thrill experience. It is to give you a sense of fear. That's its intention, a sense of awe. But that can also tip over to something else that we're really frightened of.
And Floyd, what do you do about it now? Do you not fly?
No, I don't. It's not that bad. I distract myself from it when I'm flying. I watch a movie, or I really get into whatever I'm reading. I don't look at the ground or the wings, and I remind myself that my fear has absolutely no impact on on my safety or survival. That no amount of fear on my part is going to make the plane more or less likely to crash.
It's a very sensible way to think. And Floyd, I think you're not alone. I do the exact same thing. Just recently on a flight, my daughter's like, "Mom, look out the window." My husband and I are like, "No, we're good, thanks. Yeah, we'll look straight ahead."
I think that's really good what Floyd just said, because it's just because you feel it doesn't mean it's going to come true.
Floyd, thank you. 1300 222 774. You can text as well. This text saying, as an adult, I've developed a fear of heights. This is after many dreams where I'm clinging to the outside of aeroplanes, keep landing and taking off. They make the nightmares stop. I did art therapy. I drew the nightmare and then redrew it with a happy ending, and it worked instantly. Now, that's a good idea, Shawn, do you think?
Absolutely. Better out than in, I say.
Yeah. Draw it.
Yes, draw it, express it, put words to it, find some kind of meaning behind it, and it will be released.
Bienna's called from Mount Dandenong. Hi, Bienna.
Hi there. Sorry, it's Brenna.
Oh, Brenna, sorry.
That's all right. That's right. I'm just calling. My son has just turned 5, and I've watched him over the last, say, about 6 months develop a fear of being locked in the car by himself and us not knowing where he is or not being able to find him.
And did something trigger this?
It's actually really interesting. He's been able to pinpoint the things that have triggered it. So it was over 6 months ago, he was in the car while my husband was filling up a gas bottle at the petrol station. And my husband took longer than usual. And by the time my husband got back, he was a little bit panicked. And then I'm not exactly sure what's happened between then and now, but now we've got a new baby as well in the family. And I would often say, strap my older son in the car, go back inside, get the baby, bring him out, put him in the car. And it got to the point where my son was getting really stressed about me doing that, so we had to do it the other way around. And then we had an incident where we locked our keys in the car when we went to the swimming pool and had a big muck around trying to get back into the car, having to go home and get the keys. And now it's to the point that my son, when I put his brother in the car, and if my son's already strapped in the car, he wants me to walk around the front of the car to get back to the driver's side so that he can see me the whole time rather than walking around the back of the car.
Oh, gosh. So what should Brenna do, Shawn? What are some strategies that she could use here? Because it's interesting that her son has been able to pinpoint some of those elements.
Yeah, it's really helpful that he is able to say that. I just have to give a preface that I'm not a child psychologist, but it seems like he has some attachment issues, and it seems to be around an appropriate age, but maybe that's something that you can explore with an expert in that field.
Yeah, he definitely does have attachment issues as well. He won't be left with anyone at the moment. So
and having a new bub too always sort of heightens that, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Brenna, thank you. Best of luck with that. I've had a text from Sam just saying, hey, Rish, maybe you could take your daughter to the zoo to meet the really cool staff and talk about the love and the amazing snakes that we share the land with. So beyond just kind of my daughter's growing fear of snakes, how helpful is it, Shawn, to confront fears to that extreme?
Oh, that's what we do in our rooms. We actually had a couple of pythons with a snake handler that came in with a woman who just couldn't handle being around snakes at all. And at the end of the hour and a half, she was handling a number of them and was very comfortable around them. You do need to be educated when you have an irrational fear around why that isn't a concern for your safety. And it would be really helpful to take it to the zoo, to have that chat, organise a chat with an expert in the field, and then eventually get closer and closer to being gradually exposed to her fears.
Gosh, I've got clever listeners. That's great. I knew I would solve this. Well, not solve it, but I would have some strategies by people far smarter than me today. And the other thing that I didn't want this to become about me and my story, I just knew how common it would be. And as a parent, a lot of times we're just thrown with things unexpectedly, like a fear within a child. And we're like, oh, shivers, I don't feel good for this. I'm not sure what to do here and what my right move should be, because we're scared of making it worse, Shawn.
Yeah, like the myth is that you shouldn't talk about it, or there's a certain thing that you might say that might make it worse. I guess the best thing to do is just have an open discussion and keep the discussions going and see if you can help your child be a bit more grounded in their reality of that they are safe right now, and if need be, get a bit more education with whatever that specific fear is. So for your daughter, it would be taking her to the zoo. Yeah, that's a great suggestion.
1300 222 774. Lucy, what's your fear?
I had heart surgery, bypass surgery in 2002, and after it I had developed a real fear of the dark. And when I was in the dark, I could see monsters, and it was horrible.
So this has happened post-surgery. You didn't have a fear of the dark before it?
No. And the doctors or the psychologist said to me, it's something to do with the heart-lung machine that they use. But I had a very good rehab team, which included the psychologist, and he helped me deal with it. It sort of as if I get very, very stressed or sick or something, it sort of comes back to me in waves, but I know how to deal with it now.
And so what about an average evening, Lucy, when you go to bed? Do you need a little night light?
Well, I giggle because we just moved into a new lifestyle village, and we have a street light straight out the front of my bedroom window, which suits me very nicely.
Everyone else is like, I don't want that place because there's the light out the front. Lucy's like, that's my house. Thank you very much.
And his suggestion to me when it was really, really bad was, well, go round before dark and just put lights on in little in rooms, and and sort of just put lights up so that
it's your way of dealing with it. Shawn, I'm fascinated in whether or not it's common for things like what Lucy happens where a fear is developed, say, post-surgery. Because you do hear sometimes people will say, I woke up from surgery and all of a sudden, yada, 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 and it inserts something strange.
Yeah, look, I'm not sure how common it is, but it's not unheard of. Surgery is traumatic, and it, for some people, really is a life and death situation. And so there would be associated fears with that event, and then the mind attaches to whatever it is that first felt like the fear triggered it and continue to expand on that. So it's good that, Lucy, you caught that early and have addressed that and continued to do that.
Lucy, thank you. A text from Alison. Bridges are my fear. I never used to have it, but now I'll go the long way around to avoid them. When I was in Hobart, I drove back through, Glenorchy, to avoid this particular bridge. Bridges.
I'd be really interested to learn from Alison what is it about bridges that she's scared about. Is it the heights, or is it the fear that the bridge may collapse? And usually you are trying to help people like Alison understand what their irrational fears are so that they can start to apply logic.
It's funny, this has just reminded me of something that I haven't thought about in years. And whenever we would drive over the big Phillip Island bridge, from San Remo into Phillip Island, we would always have this thing of, wind up your windows so that, if the bridge collapsed. It was a bit of a fun, but now I'm thinking back on a twisted game that my parents would play. But I think I did get quite frightened by it. I never said anything to my parents at the time, but every time we went over a bridge, I did have horrible images. So you never know what's going to trigger it, do you?
No, you can't. Sometimes it is based on that environment of having some kind of comment made, or that you see your parents actually concerned about a specific event or situation. It's hereditary. It's really hard to pinpoint, but it does come up, and it is treatable.
Shawn Goldberg is with you as a psychologist and the director of Mind Up, 7 minutes away from 3. You're on Afternoons. My name's Richelle. We're talking about what makes us develop certain fears, maybe as a child or maybe later in life. Quite often they're rational, quite often they're irrational, like yours, Jess.
Yeah, I know mine's irrational because I'm afraid of something that's not real, which is zombies.
So you have a genuine fear of zombies, and even though you know that they're not real.
Yeah, yep. And so if anyone's talking about movies that have zombies or TV shows, I'll just leave the room and quietly come back when they're finished. And I know where it started. It started like more than 10 years ago. I watched 2 movies that were about zombies. One was called I Am Legend, and the other one was called 28 Days Later. And since then, so more than 10 years ago, there's not a single day that goes past I don't think about, particularly I Am Legend. Every day.
Really? I know that film. That film was pretty freaky, Jess.
Well, somebody told me, I already had developed a bit of a fear anyway, and somebody said, oh, it's not about zombies, it's about an illness or something. So I'd watched it, in good faith. And then, developed quite a phobia, I would say. And I know what it is about. It's the uncontrolled human violence against other humans, that uncontrollable type. So I just have to.
So when you say,
and I feel even sick thinking about
oh,
it.
doll, I know. Good on you for ringing me.
So silly, isn't it?
No, it's not. And look, it's odd, but I love it at the same time. So when you say you think about it on a daily basis, is it just like a fleeting kind of little thought, or is it something that dominates your thoughts?
Sometimes, no. What doesn't dominate my thoughts. It's more if anything can trigger it. So I could be sitting at the traffic lights and see someone that looked like much from that movie, or when Will Smith is mentioned because he's in that movie, it could be anything. And it might even be nothing will trigger it. It'll just be that's what I'm thinking about that morning. Yeah, it's so bad. But my family know, and they just don't talk about it.
And so, Shawn, is that common that Jess has something that she knows? Like, I guess the thing that I find interesting is that Jess knows that the zombies aren't real.
Yeah, we know zombies aren't real, but as Jess pointed out, with good insight, it seems like it's more about uncontrolled human violence. Movies seem to be like dreams for a lot of people, that how you might attach yourself to a certain character or a certain plot or a certain movie that you would feel strongly about, more strongly than other movies. And that might resonate with certain aspects of yourself or about humanity, as Jess has pointed out, that resonate for you in a good way, but sometimes in a really frightening way too.
You know what I found interesting, Shawn, is that the majority of us know the trigger or know the lead up as to where and how the fear and phobia came about. Is that common? Or is it normally you trying to dig it out?
It is common for people to know where it started, but it doesn't necessarily help, does it? That just because you know doesn't change that fact that you don't have to be scared about it anymore. Fear is irrational. Fear is a sense of a gut feeling, a brain, the fight-flight response telling you to get out of a certain situation or fight a certain situation where you're in immediate danger. And so we're taught, and we know instinctively to trust our gut, and if our gut's screaming out there's something wrong, that's all the information that the brain is going to listen to, and the body.
There's a text here saying, Richelle, I have a terrible fear of dying and leaving my children, triggered by a friend suddenly dying. It's been very, very hard to cope. I think a lot of people, once they have kids, are incredibly scared of their own mortality.
Yeah, so it's interesting, that effect, and it does come up quite a lot where people become more and more fearful of their mortality as they value life and they see how valuable life is through the eyes of being a parent and having children.
If these fears that many of us have start to have an impact maybe on our daily life or on our emotional, physical well-being, or on our family's well-being, what's the best thing that someone should do, Shawn?
Well, the first thing to do is to admit that that's actually happening. And I think that's a hard one to admit, that it is impacting them to that degree, or at least admit it to somebody else. They can always speak to their GP about it, speak to family members, but once it starts to impact on their day-to-day living from all those aspects you mentioned, then definitely come and see a psychologist, because we are there to help and help give them the skills to manage that.
And I think, as we've discovered today, you're not alone. It's very common, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, the statistics, let's say, for fear of flying itself are quite high, and the same for fear of needles, as we've discussed previously, and on. So it's quite common.
Don't be embarrassed. Shawn Goldberg, thank you. Psychologist and director of Mind Up. And to Jess, who rang in, who has a fear of zombies, here's some advice for you. Buy a cricket bat. That's what Simon Pegg uses. Yeah, see, that's a good zombie movie. Maybe that's a good idea as well. Watch a funny zombie movie. It's